Well, good morning once again. How are you guys doing today? Good. Good to see you. Hey, before we start, I do want to just open in prayer one more time. God, thank you so much for your presence here. Lord, thank you that we always have hope in you no matter what else is going on in the world around us. And I recognize today that people who are coming in here maybe have more on their minds and on their hearts than the things that we've seen in the media recently. God, we're going through some personal things. And so, God, I just pray right now for your presence to come and minister to each and every heart here this morning. God, give the answer that we need to hear. Lord, give the healing that we need today. Lord, give the direction that we're looking for. So, God, speak to us with your Holy Spirit, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys. Hey, so I noticed this strange phenomena started occurring in my life not that long ago. You see, my wife would walk up to me with her cell phone, and she wanted to show me a picture or a text, and she'd put it like right here in my face. And I'm like, baby, I can't see that close up. And she would say, John, the phone is not that close up. I thought it was like 6 inches from my face. It was more like 2 feet, right? And I'm like, it goes, is there something wrong with you right now? Is there something wrong with your vision? And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? You know, I realized that my short-term vision started to go. Has anyone experienced that in your life? Okay, a lot of you, right? All right. Do you know what that's called? Yeah. Old age. It's called presbyopia. There it is right there. Presbyopia. It's when your eyes gradually lose the ability to see things clearly close up. Presbyopia comes from a Greek word which means old eye, okay? So I'm like, really? Yeah. And so what happens when you have presbyopia, okay, your eye, the lens, I got a little picture up here, the lens that's marked there in the middle, what happens is it's softer when you're younger. And when you focus on things, it tends to, change so that you can focus on it, and then it sends the little image to the back of your eye so it lands just correctly. But when you get older, it starts to harden. And so when you're trying to look up close, it's not adjusting the way it should, and now you're not able to see things close up. I mean, I used to read things perfectly. I remember my uncle used to give me a bottle, like a prescription bottle. He's like, John, I can't read this. Can you read it? And you know how tiny those letters are, right? And I'm reading them, and now I find myself doing the same thing. Anybody here like this, right? It's like 3 feet away. Oh, I can read it now, right? I hated hearing this news, okay? Now, the sad news is that it happens to almost every single person here. So if it hasn't happened to you and you're a bit younger, you're like, oh, no. Yeah, it's going to happen to you too. But here's the point of my story. My story is not to tell you something like that's bad going to happen to you, all the awesome things that you experience as you start to get older. Really, the reason I tell you this is to illustrate to you that sometimes things that are really close up are really hard to see in your life. I don't know if you've realized that. But in fact, you don't have to be that old to experience it. Man, I meant to bring a program with me. I don't have one, but I'm going to encourage you to do it. Pick up your program, if you will, every single person here for a moment. I want you to hold it out in front of your face for a second. And now I want you to put it right at the tip of your nose. Go ahead. Can you read your program right now? Okay, if you can, you must be amazing, okay? You can't because why? It's too close up. All you see is like these blurry little marks. But if you have it there and you start to pull it away, suddenly things start to come into focus and you can actually make sense of what's on that paper, right? Because it got a little bit farther away from you. You see, these little letters and words start to appear. They start to make sense to us because we know how to read, and I actually can understand what's being said, and we understand the meaning of what's going on that page. You see, we're sometimes too close to a situation, we can't really see clearly. We can't make sense of it sometimes. Sometimes we see things when it's that close up from a limited perspective. Like if I get up in the morning right now and I try to put my Bible right here, I just can't read it. Now, I used to be able to do it. In fact, I used to put my hand down like this, and I literally, and the page is right there. I can't do that anymore. I have to move it away just so I can see it. You see, when you're too close to something, sometimes it can be hard to see clearly. But when we pull away, right, and we see the bigger picture, sometimes things then become in focus for you and me, and they begin to make sense. And that's why we need to see the bigger picture in life. You see, the bigger picture helps us out with the smaller things in our lives. The bigger picture helps answer some of the questions that you and I have. The questions like this: what is God doing in my life right now? Have you ever asked that question? You're like, God, what are you doing? Or maybe you've asked the question, why did this happen to me, God? Or maybe you're wondering, how can I find meaning in the things that are happening in my life, or the meaning of my life? Or maybe you're wondering, where do I belong? All these questions make more sense when we see the bigger picture of what God is doing in our lives. And if we stop to consider that we're part of a greater story for a moment, because we all have stories. All of us came in here, we have our life story. We could come up and tell you and spend hours talking about how we got to the place we are right now. We all have a story, but if we would stop to consider for just a moment that God is writing a bigger story, a greater story that's just involves you and me. And if we could see ourselves in the context of that bigger story, maybe our life would start to make sense. Some of these questions that we're wondering would be answered. Because we go, oh, now that makes sense to me. It didn't when I was right here, but now when I see the bigger picture, they're really making sense. You see, God is telling a bigger story than just you and me here today. And all of our stories will make more sense in light of His story. And see, it's then that we find our purpose. It's then that we find meaning, and it's then that we find significance. So we're in the series called Patriarchs, the Line of Promise, because we're studying the book of Genesis. And everything happens in the beginning of Genesis. It's the beginning of the Bible. But we've been learning one thing, and I've been repeating this phrase every single week, and I'm going to keep repeating it as long as we are in the book of Genesis, and that is this: that the Bible, from beginning to end, the whole story, the whole Bible is about one man, Jesus Christ. And even though He doesn't appear until the book of Matthew in the New Testament, even in the beginning, his story begins, because it begins with the root of His ancestry. It begins with what we call the patriarchs, therefore the name of the series. And it was the line of promise that is then passed on from one generation to the next. You see, God came to a guy named Abraham and gave him 3 promises. The first promise was that he was going to be a great nation. From him was going to come a great nation, and we see Israel came from him. And then he said, well, I'm going to give you a land that's going to become yours as an eternal possession. And we see today that Israel is in the land of Israel. At that time, it was called Canaan. And then he came to Abraham and gave him another promise, all this at the same time, actually. But he said the third promise was this: I'm going to bless you so that you can be a blessing to all the other nations. And that was fulfilled when Jesus Christ came from the line of Judah, from the line of Israel. He died on a cross for your and my sins and blessed the world. You see, these pictures, these promises were to be passed on from generation to generation to generation throughout the Bible, through the kings, all the way till we get to Jesus. But they start with Abraham. He has a son, Isaac. Then Isaac has a son, Jacob, who becomes Israel. He has 12 children, 12 boys, and they become the 12 tribes of Israel. And you see, this is the big picture. All of this that we're looking at in Genesis is this big picture of the whole Bible. This is what it's all about. And we're reading all these stories, and there's lessons for us within each individual story. But if we take each individual story, it won't make a whole lot of sense without understanding why it belongs where it does. You see, last week we heard the story of Joseph. Joseph was the second youngest child of Jacob, or Israel, because he's renamed Israel, right? And he's a favored child, and the other brothers don't really like him too much, and so they sell him into slavery to a caravan that's going down to Egypt. They sell him away, but that wasn't their original plan. The original plan was just to kill him. But this caravan comes by, and Judah has the bright idea. That's one of the sons, and he says, let's sell him instead. We'll make some money, and we'll get rid of him, and they do. And then they go, well, we got to do something to let our dad know what's going to happen. So they take this very special coat, his multicolored coat that they had, and they dip it in blood of a goat, and they bring it to him, and they say, look, we found this. And his dad says, oh, my God, he must have been killed. He must have been eaten by a wild animal. And the brothers say nothing about really what happened, so they let him believe that. And then the dad goes into mourning, basically, for the rest of his life over his son. And so at the end of last week, we're left off with Joseph being in Egypt, sold to a guy named Potiphar. That's where we see his story. The dad, Jacob, Israel, believes his son is dead. We'll never see him again, right? And so he's mourning. And the brothers believe the same thing. Well, he's sold into Egypt. We'll never see him again. That's where the story ends. And if you're like me, you're like, well, what's the rest of the story? I want to know what happens to Joseph. But the funny thing is, that's not what happens. We have this separate story that suddenly appears where we're all going, wait a minute, what happened to Joseph? And so we see this story. The spoiler alert, though, is the rest of Genesis is going to be about Joseph. But the narrative stops here, and it focuses on a guy named Judah. Why? Because the Bible, from beginning to end, is about one man, Jesus Christ. And Judah is in the line of the Messiah. And so we got to stop for a moment and look, because that's the greater picture. You see, it says this, if we were to turn all the way back to the book of Revelation, we're going to see this verse. It says, then one of the elders said to me, talking about to John the apostle who's writing this, do not weep, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has triumphed to open the scrolls and its 7 seals, referring to the Messiah, referring to the Lamb of God. He's saying he comes from the tribe of Judah. So God chose the tribe of Judah to bring the Messiah. So let's check out Judah's story for a moment, because this is why it's here. Most of the stories, though, that we've been going through, it's a little bit different than the normal day-to-day, like you guys would probably think would happen in the life of a normal tribe of Israel person, I guess. It came to pass that at the time, Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. So Hira is a friend that he makes of the Canaanites, and he finds another man there named Shua, and he married the daughter and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name That's one son. And she conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. So that's 2 sons. And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. That's 3 sons. And he was at Chezib when she bore him. So she means just say that he's not really hanging out with his brothers and sisters and his family. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. And Judah said to Onan, now that's the second son, go into your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up to an heir to your brother. But Onan knew that the heir would not be his, and it came to pass, when he went into his brother's wife, that he admitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord. Therefore, the Lord killed him also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. For he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. And so after the Joseph situation, this whole scenario went down where they sold him into Egypt. I don't know what's going on with Judah, but he decides he's going to separate for a time from his brothers. Maybe seeing his dad like mourning every day, like he just couldn't take that. I can't do this. Let me just move out of here. Maybe seeing his brothers all the time just reminded him that he made money off of selling his brother, and there was just kind of some guilt there. You know, he's like, I just, you know what? Let me get out of here. So he kind of takes off, and he goes off on his own, and he starts hanging out with some Canaanite people. And Joseph is going to be in Egypt for about 20 to 25 years before he's reunited with his brothers, okay? So this story is going to take place sometime in this period of time where Joseph is down in Egypt, but before he gets down to Egypt himself. So there's this story, and Judah's story here of his family. That's what we're looking at right now. So Judah marries this Canaanite woman, and they don't even give her a name. She's just the daughter of Shua. That's how important she is to the story, apparently. And so we don't see much more of her, but she gives him 3 boys, Onan, and Shelah. And I guess on that last one, they were hoping to have a girl, because they named him Shelah, all right? You know, but so as the boys grew, though, it was kind of Judah's responsibility to find them a wife. So that was kind of the tradition. You would make arrangements with other people. So he finds a wife for his oldest son, and her name is Tamar. But the problem is, I don't know if Judah was doing that great of parenting, because maybe it was the influences of the Canaanites on his children. Maybe it was that he just not trained them very well. But Er turns out wicked. He definitely doesn't know the Lord. I mean, because God smites him. Kabam! I mean, that must have been pretty bad that God just killed him. And so maybe you're saying to yourself, well, that's kind of mean of God. That was kind of really brutal of him to just take out this guy for being wicked. But sometimes when we think that way, we fail to recognize that God this might be his mercy on this guy, Er. Because Er is doing things that's not only hurting himself, but he's hurting other people. And in doing so, God is protecting other people. Not only that, he's protecting the line of the Messiah. I mean, when we're wicked, just like when we're good, both of them have an influence on the people around us. And if he's going to be wicked and he's going to influence his children and the other people around him, God's like, I don't know if I really want this line to start off this way. And so he just kind of takes Er right out of the picture. And Judah then tells his next son, Onan, he's like, okay, now you are going to be married to Tamar. And what he was doing right there was he was filling what was called the Levirate marriage. And a Levirate marriage comes from the Latin word lever, which means brother-in-law. So it wasn't Levi like the sons of Levi. It meant that it was a brother-in-law was to take the place of the brother. And this was a tradition that was practiced at the time of Israel. It later becomes part of the law of Israel, and I put that on the screen also. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son that she bears shall carry the name of the dead brother. They're going to name him after him, so that the brother would have been named or the son, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. So if a man died without having children, the tradition was that a brother would marry the wife so that he could provide a son and an heir for that man. So his name would not be blotted out. In this case, if you were a tribe of Israel or a certain line, we don't want that to be blotted out. So this is how they would make sure that they would continue and they would proliferate. And so this son, by the way, would not be the son, considered the son of the second brother. He would be considered the son of the first brother. Therefore, he would get the birthright that was supposed to go to Er. Er's the oldest one. He's supposed to get the birthright. So imagine Onan there, like, okay, go in there and do your duty, fulfill the duty of your brother. And he's like, wait a minute. If I do this, then that son gets the birthright? Is that what's going to happen, right? So he goes in and he has sexual relationships with Tamar, but it says he spilled his seed on the ground. And if you don't know what that means, just go to the cafe and the volunteers will answer that for you when we're done. But basically, he doesn't complete the sexual act, okay, so that she can't get pregnant. So he's like, oh, I'm willing to have sex with her, but I'm not willing to do what I'm supposed to do. And so God looks on and he's like, all right, kabam, the lightning bolt comes down and strikes him. I don't know if it was a lightning bolt. That's just the way I'm going to say it, okay, today. Now, some people think that this verse, and we've read this, so maybe you've read this verse before, and some people think that like, this means that birth control is not good according to God. Now, that's not what this means. Now, that's a conversation you might have with God. I don't know. But that's not what this means. Because it wasn't just that he emitted on the ground. It was the reason why he did that. Because he didn't want to have that child. I mean, think about this for just a moment. This is the line of the Messiah, right? This is the next guy in line, and you're not going to have the child? You're not going to continue this line for me? And because he sinned in that way, because he wanted the birthright, because he didn't want to do this for his brother, God takes him out. And so here's what happens. Sheila, right, is the only one left. So Judah's like, let's see, you took out the first son. He was with you. You know, is gone. Now Onan's gone. Maybe I'm going to keep back my last son, right? So he says to Tamar, listen, he's not old enough anyway. You go live with your father, and your father will take care of you for a while. And when he's older, I'll come and then bring him to you, and then you can be married. But he's thinking in the back of his head, are you crazy? I just lost 2 sons to the same woman. I mean, she's like the black widow, right? I don't know what's going to happen. My last son is not going to him. So his intention is to leave her in her father's house forever. Like, I'm not going to mess with that, right? And so Judah had no intention of giving the son. And the thing is, they're caught up in a bigger story, but they can't see it. Because Judah's going to be the heir, and he sees that, and this is the line of the Messiah, but he doesn't understand what this is meaning. the greater impact that it has. And so he's looking at his story very myopically. He's looking right at his story, but he doesn't see what the bigger picture is. And so if you're following along today, this is something that will be helpful for you to know. And I put it in your outline. If you pull it out, it says, to live your life well, you must see your story in the context of God's story. If you want to live your life well, then you have to see your story in context of God's story, because you're caught up in this story too. We all are caught up in this story. But if we're going to ignore God and we're going to say he's not part of the story, then your life is not going to make sense, and you're not going to produce things that are meaningful, because at the end of your life, you're going to be like, what did this all amount to? What was all this worth? Because all we're going to be doing is facing us and eternity in that moment without God. So to live your life well, you must see your story in the context of God's story. And so before his death, Israel is going to bless all of his children. We're going to get there. It's chapter 49, almost at the end of Genesis. And he's blessing each one, or he's giving his blessings to each of them. He's praying for them. And this is what he says when he comes to Judah. The scepter will not depart from Judah. The scepter was the symbol of ruling, right? If you had the scepter, you're the king. So he says the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from his descendants. Okay, it's not just you, Judah, but all your descendants are going to get that staff too, until the coming of the one whom it belongs, the one whom all nations will honor. Speaking of the Messiah. So you are the line. You're the line. The kings are going to come from you. The line of ruling is going to come to you, because Jesus ultimately is the king of Israel. He's the king of the world. He's the king of the universe, right? He is our king. And so he's the ultimate one it's going to come to. That's what he's saying. He's coming from your line. But here, think about this for a moment. You're Judah. You have 3 children. 2 of them are now dead. Like, okay, we just lost 60% of our chances here of making this happen, right? They're like, oh my gosh, I got 1 left, and he's keeping them back. He's hiding them. You see, each of these 3 guys, Onan, and Judah, all failed to see the bigger picture. They all failed to see what's going on around him. Doesn't see it because he does evil, right? There's no conviction to live well in this scenario for him. There's no eternal perspective. He's just like, I'm just going to live the way ever I want to. So God's like, okay, you're out of the line. And then Onan doesn't see it. He can't see past his own ambition. All he can see is the immediate gratification, the immediate need right now. And God's like, okay, that's not going to work either. And Judah doesn't see it because he doesn't see the more important story, the God story, because he doesn't see Sheila as being a part of it. He's just like, okay, I'm going to hold him back from this. You see, they don't see the bigger picture. And so their decisions turn inward. They turn selfish. Because that's what happens when we don't see the bigger story. If we only see our story without a greater context, then we're going to live our story the way we want to live our story, and we're going to live it the best we can. And of course, we should try to live our story the best we can. But if we don't have the greater story, we're not going to live it correctly. You see, have you guys ever walked into a joke that's halfway through? I had a friend, and we used to just, from time to time, we would just do this thing where we'd only tell the punchlines of jokes. So we already knew the jokes. We just tell the punchline. And he'd tell the punchline. I tell the punchline. And we just keep telling the punchlines, and it's hilarious. But if you walked in on that, you'd be like, what is so funny about what you just said? If you walk in halfway through a punchline, a joke, you don't get the joke. You don't get the ending, do you? Because you're just like, it didn't make sense to me at all. Because we didn't see the whole thing from beginning to end. You see, if we only see our story, it won't make complete sense to you. And some people are going through life right now, and they're wondering why. I don't understand purpose. I don't understand meaning. The reason I came to know the Lord, the thing that began, like the Genesis, the seed, was because I thought to myself, how am I supposed to live my life? What's the purpose? Because I don't know how to live my life if I don't understand the purpose. If I don't understand where I'm supposed to be or what I'm supposed to be doing, how am I going to live my life? And that was, for me, what began to draw me in interest to understand God and to understand Jesus Christ more. And for many of us, if we're going through life and we feel it's kind of arid, we feel it's kind of dry, and we're like wondering what's next for me, or even if you are a Christian, you're wondering what's happening in your situation, it's because we have to see it in a greater context than just our life, because we're caught up in the story of God. You see, not everything in this world is just about us or just about me. And probably somebody in your life has told you that already, right? They've already told you it's not just about you. And if we live just for our story, like Er and Onan, we're going to miss out on the greater story. We're going to miss out on the story of God. So let's see what happens to Tamar in this scenario. Now, in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. So the woman that doesn't have a name, who is his wife, ends up dying. And Judah was comforted, and he went up to the sheep to his sheep shearers at Timnah. And he and his friend Hira, so he's hanging out with his buddy again, the Adulamite, they all go to Timnah for the sheep shearing festival. And it was told Tamar, saying, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown. Okay, he's grown up. Nothing's happening. I need to do something. And she was not given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot. So there she is at a tent with like these kind of a veil on her, and he thinks she's a harlot because she had covered her face. So then he turned to her by the way and said, "Please let me come into you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" And he said, "I'll send you a goat from my flock." And she said, "Well, you don't have one in your hand right now. Will you give me a pledge till you send it?" And then he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" And she said, "Your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand." And then he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. So she goes back to her father's house. And Judah said to the young goat, Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adulamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand. But he did not find her. So he goes, the Adulamite goes, Hiram looks, but he can't find her. And then he asked the men of the place, saying, "Where is the harlot who was openly by the roadside?" And they said, "There's no harlot in this place." So he returned to Judah and said, "I can't find her." Also, the men of the place said that there was no harlot in that place. And then Judah said, "Let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed. For I sent this young goat and have not found her." I mean, I did my duty. I sent it, but we can't find her. Let's just leave it as it is. And it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry." So Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." And when she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, "By the man to whom these belong, I am with child." And she said, "Please determine whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." And so Judah acknowledged them. When he saw them, "All right, I'm caught." He said, "She has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah my son." And he never knew her again. Thanks for bearing with me through that story. But Judah's wife dies. So now he's all alone. And he's like, after a time of mourning and all, he's like, "Okay, I just want to go get comforted by going to a sheep shearing party." Like, no, that's not what happened, right? So if they were all at the same time during the year, they would go and shear their sheep. And so it usually became like a festival. So the people from the area go in there with their herds, and they're shearing the sheep. And of course, now they're selling the wool, so they're making money, they're spending money, and they're having fun. So it was like, "Oh yeah, this is really awesome." So he goes up there, and he's thinking, "Okay, I'm also going to have another good time and find somebody there, right, to satisfy some of my needs." But Tamar at the time, they tell her, "Hey, he's going up to the sheep shearing party." And she's like, "Oh, all right. I see that the son is grown, but he still hasn't given to me, so I don't think this is going to happen." So she devises a plan and goes up there, sets up a tent, sits outside, covers herself in a veil, and she appears to be like a temple prostitute. So he comes over and he just says, "Okay." And famous pickup line. "Well, what can I come into you?" That's like his best line. And she says, "Yes." Because "What's the price?" "Well, I'll give you a goat from my flock," but he doesn't have it on him. So she's like, "Well, what do you give me until you bring that to me?" And she says, he goes, "Whatever you want." And he says, "Well, give me your staff and give me your signet and your cord, and that will be a pledge." Because she knows he's going to come back for those things. Why is he going to come back for those things? Because the signet was generally, sometimes it was a ring, but a lot of times it was a little scroll that was wrapped in a cord around your neck, or maybe it was on your wrist, or sometimes even on your waist. And that signet was just basically something that you would use to make your mark on documents that were legal. So you would buy and purchase these things with that. right? So you maybe you rolled it into wax, or maybe you put ink on it and rolled it onto a papyrus or whatever it was, and then they saw that was your mark, and so it was like, hey, that's your credit card basically. And your staff would have his markings on it, that it belonged to him, not only him, his family name and his line. And so when she had those things, basically he gave her his license and a major credit card. That's what he did, okay, for you and me. Now, I don't know how many people would do that, right? You give that to a prostitute, but that's what he did. And she's like, okay, I got your license and I got your major credit card. I know you're going to return with the payment, which was this goat. And so when they're done, she goes and leaves. Now, she's only there for like a day or whatever it took for him to pass by. And somehow she suspected that this guy was going to kind of compromise his own, integrity, right, and sleep with this prostitute, and it works out. So she goes home to be with her dad, and now he's like, okay, got to get my stuff back, got to get my license and my credit card back. So he sends his friend, he's probably too embarrassed to go himself, find the woman, give her the goat, get my stuff. So he goes, and there's no woman there. There's no prostitute. And he asks around, there's nobody there, and he comes back and says, I tried to find him, I couldn't. And so he's like, well, let's just let it lie. I mean, I tried to make it right. I tried to do my part by giving a goat, but here's the deal. We keep asking around. Everybody's going to know that I was with a prostitute. Not only that, they're going to make fun of me. Let me tell you, you gave a prostitute your license and a major credit card? And he's like, I don't want to be embarrassed. Let's just end this right now. And that's what he does. So things seem to be going okay until 3 months later, some people come up to him and says, hey, do you know your daughter Tamar, your son's wife, that she was sleeping around? Not only that, she's pregnant. So he's like, all right, bring her out to be burned. Now, if you were a woman at that time, it was a little bit more severe. To be honest, it was for both of you. Whether you were a man or a woman caught in adultery, she was betrothed basically to the son Sheila, even though they weren't officially married. To be betrothed to someone like Mary was to Joseph, by the way, and to become pregnant, the law said that they were to be killed. A woman was to be burned. So he's like, bring her out and be burned. Now, secretly, I don't think he enjoyed the fact that she was going to die, but he's probably thinking to himself, man, this is working out pretty good for me. I mean, think about it, right? Because this problem that I have, if I give her Sheila and Sheila dies, my last son, this is going to be a problem. So he's probably thinking, this is working out. And so he's like, all right, let's do it. Let's just bring her out. And so while they're there and the sentencing is about to take place, she pulls out these items. She's like, hey, by the way, guys, before all this goes down, all right, before this takes place, I just want you guys to answer one question for me. This staff, this credit card, this license, whose is it? She holds it out, and Judah's like, oh, man, I can't believe it, right? And in that moment, he realized what happened, and at least he was honorable enough to go, oh, my gosh, she was more honorable than me in this scenario. She did the right thing, and I didn't do the right thing. I was withholding my son. I shouldn't have done that, and this woman is actually righteous about what she did. So the second point that I'd like you to know today is this. In light of God's story, the world should not influence us. We should influence the world. In light of God's story, the world shouldn't be influencing us, but we should influence the world. It's kind of interesting here that Tamar is found to be the righteous person, and she's the Canaanite. You would think, Judah, come on. You got this legacy that's going to come from you. You should be the guy doing the right thing. You should be the one who's the right example to everyone else. You see, Tamar was the Canaanite who doesn't even know the God of Abraham. She should have been the one who he was instructing instead, but it's different. It's the other way around. See, the main story of the Bible, as we said, is about one man, Jesus Christ. But there's a secondary story that is attached to that story, and that is that the people of Israel are the chosen people of God. They're a chosen nation. And that's why Genesis is not going to end here with this story. This is the last kind of, Judah has another little part to play in this Genesis, but this is the ending of his story because he's part of the line of Jesus, right? The Messiah. And we're going to see that happen down the line, but Joseph is going to take over for here. Why is the rest of the story about Joseph? Because Joseph is sent to Egypt to preserve Israel, the nation of Israel. You see, there's a secondary story. The nation of Israel are God's chosen people. God told Moses this. Moses, when he frees them, takes from Egypt, takes them through to the promised land. He says, speak to all the congregation of the children, God speaking to Moses, to the children of Israel, and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. What does holy mean? My wife asked me this question the other day. John, what does holy mean? She's trying to talk to the kids and ask them what holy means. Holy simply means, in its purest form, its purest translation is set apart. Set apart. The things that are holy are set apart from what is not normal, that is not common. Set apart from what's common. God said, I am holy, I am set apart, and I want you, Israel, to be set apart from the world. I want you to be set apart from what is common. You see, they were supposed to be separate from the world. They're supposed to be different than all the other nations, but for a purpose. And this is why they must be preserved. I mean, the Messiah is going to come through them, but we're going to notice that the story of God opens up. It starts with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, who's Israel, right? And then the next thing you know, it's 12 tribes. I wish I had one more finger. I don't, right? My toes are up right now. There's 12 tribes of Israel, and so it broadens out the story. And we're going to follow them all the way to we get to the Messiah, but they have a very special purpose. You see, they weren't just special, but they were given the commandments and the laws. And the reason they were given the commandments and the laws, and you'll notice that most of the commandments in the Old Testament are actually for Israel. There were societal laws. How are you supposed to govern your society? Because their society was supposed to be different than everybody else. If you walk down the street and you left your doors unlocked, or an old lady was walking, nothing would happen to them. Nobody would steal your stuff. Nobody would beat you up because their laws were really strict, right? If you walked into a city that was owned by the Israelites, you're like, wow, this is really cool. I'd like to live here. You know, they also had dietary laws because they were supposed to be healthier than the other people at that time. I mean, they didn't have the refrigeration that you and I had, right? And they're like, wow, you guys live longer. You look better. You've got this great skin. I don't know. This is an aside, okay? Sorry. But I was watching. This thing popped up on my screen. There's a woman that was in the beauty pageant in Texas, and she's 71 years old. They got rid of the age restriction. She looked like she was 40. I'm like, this woman looks amazing. That's what they look like. They were like 70-year-old people walking around like they're 35, you know? And then they also had ceremonial laws, how they were supposed to worship God. And, of course, they had moral laws. And those moral laws are the ones that you and I have to abide by, too, because that's God, this is my moral law. This is what's important. This is what tells us whether we're right or wrong. And so people were supposed to look on at their society and go, why, you are so different than everybody else. And that was their opportunity. That was their moment to go, have you ever heard of the God of Abraham? Because let me tell you about the God of Abraham. That's what they were chosen for. They were chosen so that they could tell the world about God. That's who they were. And so God's got, I got a story, and Jesus Christ is the main guy. But here I got a whole people that are supposed to tell everybody about this guy that's coming and about the God whom we serve. You see, but somewhere along the line, they began to believe that the story was about them. They got sidetracked. In fact, it got so severe that at one point in history, the Jewish people believed that they were the only ones to be saved and that every other person was basically, literally, the logs for the hell fires of hell. That they were just going to be burning in hell because they were the only ones that were going to be saved. They lost complete sight of why they were chosen, why they were special. The truth is the Israelites are still a chosen people. But the problem is at this point, because they got so focused on their own story, they totally missed the main story and they missed the Messiah. They totally missed Jesus Christ when he came. In fact, Paul's writing about it. Listen to what he says. He says, for I do not desire, brethren, he's speaking to Christians, those who are following Christ, whether they're Jewish or not. He says that I do not desire that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that the blindness, in part, has happened to Israel. They're blinded right now until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. He's like, they're in a period of blindness because they didn't recognize who the Messiah was. But this opened the door even wider for all of you and I, a Gentile who's not a Jewish person. That's what it means. I don't know if there's a Jewish person here or not, or if you're of Israeli descent. Praise God if you are. But if you're not, we're still in there, you and I. And here's what he said. While they're blinded, we're the ones who are supposed to tell the world about Jesus, tell the world about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're part of the story now. We're part of the story. That's our responsibility, that we take their place in a sense, but God's not done with them yet. God's not finished with Israel. God's going to use Israel again. You turn all the way to the back of the book of the Bible, you get to the book of Revelation, and it's all about them. It's all about them. It's about all the tribes of Israel and God reusing them again for his special purpose. You see, God is working through you and me. Anybody who calls himself a Christian, it's our responsibility to influence the world, not to have the Tamars influencing us. You see, we have to be careful not to forget the greater story, because the greater story is going to decide for you and me every day how we're going to live. It's going to decide for you and me the choices that we make. It's going to decide for you and me what the compass of our life will be. Where are we headed? What are we doing? You see, it's God's story that is directing us, and it will remind us of our responsibility to steward the promises of God very well. You see, now that's you and me. But we only understand that if we understand the greater story that God is telling. So we're going to finish the chapter now and see what happens. So it came to pass at the time for giving birth, that behold, twins were born in her womb. So Tamar gives birth to twins. And so it was when she was giving birth that the one put out his hand, and so the hand comes out, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Then it happened that the hand drew back, okay? And that his brother came out unexpectedly. So the other brother comes out first and said, how did you break through this breach be upon you? Therefore his name was called Perez, because it means breach. Afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. And this ends the story. You see, here's the last thing that I want you to know, and that is that God is inviting you into his story, but you have to accept the invitation. God is inviting you into his greater story, but we have to accept the invitation. You know, it's interesting that somehow Tamar is the hero of this story, isn't she? But like, Tamar, you're the hero. You're not even part of Israel, but you become the hero. God invites her into the story. I mean, she doesn't do everything right. We probably could go back and forth and discuss, well, was it right of her to pose as a prostitute? Was it right of her to sleep with her father-in-law? But I mean, it's not like she was married to her husbands anymore. They're gone, right? It's like we could probably go back and forth maybe. But she ends up rising to the top because that's where God wanted her to be. Because God extends his mercy and his grace to a people that aren't his people. And the result of her pregnancy is twin boys. And it's kind of an interesting story, and it's kind of a throwback, really, to Jacob and Esau, because the first one sticks his hand out. I don't know how this all works, okay, ladies? I'm not trying to guess either, but his hand comes out, ties a knot around, ties this little thread. So it's like, okay, that's the first one, because why? The first one, right, gets all the promises, gets the birthright. So he sticks his hand out, but it kind of goes back in, and then the other boy comes out first. And Perez is the guy. And Perez, you're like, you're number one. I don't even know what to do here, okay? One's got a thread on his hand, but this one is the one that came out first. I don't even know what to do. How do you judge that one, right? But God is judging that one. Look back at Jacob and Esau. One comes out, the other one's grabbing onto his heel. No, I want to come out first. I mean, this is a lot of turmoil. I don't know if twins are like that or it's just happening in those days, but a lot of crazy stuff was happening. You see, Perez comes out first. And therefore we read, if we go all the way to the New Testament, in the book of Matthew, very first chapter, we see the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And part of that genealogy reads this: Judah was the father of Perez, and Zerah by Tamar. And then the son of Perez is going to be the ancestor of David ultimately, and Ruth the Moabitess, or Boaz, right? And then Ruth comes into the line also. But it's kind of interesting here because Tamar is the first woman mentioned in the genealogy. In fact, in a normal genealogy, you wouldn't even mention the woman in the type of patriarchal culture that existed with Israel. You would have been only men's names. And yet Tamar shows up. Not only is she a woman, but she's a Canaanite. You're not even an Israelite. You're a Canaanite. And God opens this door for this woman to come in because she represents for you and me this trophy of God's grace in our life. God's like, all right, come on in, Tamar. Come on in. I know Judah's messing up like crazy, but come on in. And through Judah, she has a child and becomes part of the Messianic line. She becomes part of the greater story. And God's inviting every single one of us, you and me, into the greater story. There's no place that you've gone. There's no birth. There's no way you've been born. I wouldn't say birth defect. I hope it's okay. There's no thing that you could have been born with that was abnormal, right? Or not normal that could keep you away from God. Maybe she wasn't born into the right lineage. It's okay. Maybe she didn't have the right, language, wasn't able to speak well. Maybe she didn't have the right look. whatever it was, but he says, no way, I'm inviting you into the family of God. I'm inviting you into the greater story. And that should give each and every one of us hope, because no matter where we've been, no matter what we've done, God says, listen, I'm filled with grace. And I want you as a part of the story. God's always wanted you as part of the story. Always. And he won't stop until you either say yes or you say no. And it's your choice. Because he leaves that open for you and me. I mean, I look on at this and I say, why the story of Judah? We started with Joseph. Suddenly just plunk Judah in there. Well, I hope we all understand right now, because the greater story exists and Judah needs to be there. Because we need to see how the line is going to continue. But there's something else. It reminds us of the fact that no matter how bad we mess up, because even Judah, he messes up, but Judah still gets to be in the line. No matter how bad we messed up, no matter how bad you messed up, God's still inviting us back into the story of God. Paul is writing to the Ephesians, he says this, for by grace you have been saved through faith. And this not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. The faith that you have is not even your own. God gave it to you. That's the crazy part about it. He's like, I've given you the faith enough to believe. It's from me, and it's by grace you've been saved. And he says, not by works, so that no one can boast. Because I'm that type of God. You couldn't even make it here. Tamar, you didn't even know the God of Abraham. You didn't even have a clue. And yet I'm going to send Judah. He's going to find you. You're going to go through a bunch of stuff. But my grace is extended to you. And no matter who you are today, where you're at, God's grace is continually extended to you. If you've never met him, if you've never known him, God's saying, I want you to come and to know him. And if you've known him, but you keep feeling like you keep letting him down, he's like, it's okay. I love you. Keep trying. Keep moving forward. You know, you weren't perfect before you came to Christ, and you're probably not going to be after. But it's God's grace and his mercy that overcomes. And if we're willing to say, God, by faith, I'm going to keep moving forward. I'm just going to keep trusting you every time I fall. And God says, I've got a place for you. Keep coming. You're in my story. Stay focused on the story. Stay focused on my story, not yours. And I'm going to get you exactly where you need to be. Keep moving forward. Keep living his story with your life. Let's pray. God, sometimes it's so easy to focus on the here and now, to focus on the things that I'm going through personally, and to kind of forget that there's such a greater, bigger story going on around us. Lord, the beauty of it is, it's so big, I can't conceive of it completely. And yet you invite us into it to be a significant part of it. Lord, for the person who's here today that might be hurting, God, remind them that your mercy is new every single day, and that you love them, and that you saw their life before they were even born, and you knew this moment, you knew they would fall, and yet you love them anyway, and you continue to invite them into the story. Lord, for the person here maybe that's looking for some direction, God, help us to focus on your story. Because sometimes we've got that thing right up against our nose and we can't see it. Help us to take a step back, look at your story, and allow you to fill in the meaning that we need to see in our lives. God, help us to follow you every day, even when we fail. Because God, you're always there waiting with mercy and grace for you and me, inviting us back into this story. God, don't let me down. Don't let go of me ever, God. I need you. I need you. And if we can just maintain that to your prayer. If you're here with us today and you've never given your life to Christ, then you've never really been a part of the story. You've never been a part of the greater story that God is calling you to, that he's telling. But it's an amazing story. It's better than any story you can ever imagine. And the way we enter that story is through Jesus Christ. But the one man that the whole book is about is through Jesus Christ. God came to this earth, died on a cross, paid for yours and my sin so that we could be with him forever. And the way you receive that forgiveness, the way you receive that restoration between you and God is to simply ask him into your heart. Ask him to forgive you. Ask him to make you a new creation, and he promises to do so. So if you'd like to do that today, I just want to lead you in a prayer. And so I'm going to just invite everybody to say this prayer out loud because nobody has to pray alone here. Dear God, I invite you inside to be my God, my Savior, and my friend. Forgive me of my sins. Wash me clean. I've decided today to follow you, Jesus. From this day forever, I'm yours and you're mine. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen.